The moment Graham Hancock stepped into the Aswan granite quarry, he stopped walking. Something on the ground did not look right. Deep, straight grooves ran across a slab of solid pink granite, one of the hardest stones on the planet, and the cuts looked too clean, too even, too controlled to belong to a civilization armed with nothing but copper chisels and stone hammers. He crouched down, ran his hand along the channel, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. If these marks were really made using only Bronze Age tools, then everything written in the history books about how the pyramids and temples of Egypt were built might be dangerously incomplete. And if they were not made with Bronze Age tools, then who or what actually cut the stone? This single moment, standing over a scar in ancient rock, is where one of the most explosive debates in modern archaeology begins. It is a debate that pulls in engineers, historians, geologists, and millions of curious minds around the world, all asking the same unsettling question. Did the ancient Egyptians possess a technology so advanced that we still cannot fully explain it, thousands of years later? Stay with this video until the end, because what you're about to see may change the way you look at ancient history forever. To understand why this quarry stopped a world-famous researcher in his tracks, we have to go back to a quieter place first, inside the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Sitting in a dim corner of the museum is an unfinished sarcophagus, carved from a single, massive block of red Aswan granite. At first glance, it looks like any other stone coffin from the ancient world, but look inside, and the story changes completely. Interior walls are so smooth and so uniform that they resemble something shaped by a modern machine rather than a hand tool. All four corners meet at nearly perfect right angles. The surfaces catch the light evenly, without the rough, uneven texture you would expect from thousands of hours of manual pounding. According to the official explanation, this sarcophagus, like most granite work from ancient Egypt, was shaped using copper tools, wet sand, and raw human effort. Workers were believed to have hammered and ground the stone down slowly, patiently, for months at a time. It sounds reasonable until you compare the hardness of the materials involved. On the Mohs hardness scale, copper sits at around 3. Granite sits at around 6 or 7. That is not a small gap. That is the difference between a fingernail and a knife blade. So the uncomfortable question becomes impossible to avoid. How does a soft metal cut cleanly through a stone twice as hard as itself and still leave behind walls this smooth, this symmetrical, this precise? This is the exact question that pulled Graham Hancock deeper into the mystery. He was not the first to notice it, but he became one of the loudest voices demanding an answer. If copper alone could not do this, he asked, then what tool or what method actually did? The sarcophagus was only the beginning. When researchers looked closer at the drilled sections of granite artifacts across Egypt, they found something even stranger. Fine spiral grooves cut into the stone, almost like the threading on a screw. These were not random scratches. They ran parallel to one another, spaced with an eerie repeating consistency. Under normal hand-operated drilling, pressure naturally rises and falls as a human arm tires, shifts, and adjusts its grip. That means the depth of any cut should vary, sometimes deep, sometimes shallow, sometimes crooked. But these ancient grooves show almost none of that variation. They move in one continuous direction, at what looks like the same depth over and over again, exactly the kind of pattern you would expect from a rotating tool driven by constant mechanical force rather than a tired human hand. To test whether ancient tools could actually produce this, engineers and experimental archaeologists tried recreating the process by hand. They took a hollow copper tube, packed quartz sand beneath it as an abrasive, and rotated it against a fresh block of granite, applying steady pressure the way ancient workers supposedly would have. The results were disappointing. After hours of continuous effort, the tube had barely scratched a few millimeters into the stone. The cut was rough, inconsistent, and nowhere near the clean spiral pattern seen on the ancient cores. At that rate, hollowing out an entire granite sarcophagus by hand would have taken not weeks, but many months of non-stop labor, and the copper tube itself kept bending and wearing down under the pressure, forcing constant replacement. One of the most thorough attempts to settle this question through direct experimentation came from an experimental archaeologist named Dennis Stocks, who spent years trying to physically replicate ancient Egyptian stone cutting, using only materials and tools that would have realistically existed at the time. Stocks built his own copper tube drills, mixed his own quartz sand slurries, and applied pressure using simple wooden frames and stone weights, exactly the kind of setup mainstream archaeology proposes. His experiments did manage to cut into granite, which proved the basic method was physically possible, but the results told a more complicated story than a simple yes or no. The holes Stocks produced were noticeably rougher, less symmetrical, and far slower to form than the smooth, evenly spiraled cores recovered from actual Egyptian sites. To reach anything close to the depth and finish seen in the museum pieces, his replication would have required an enormous investment of time, patience, and constant tool replacement, exactly the kind of grinding, unglamorous labor that mainstream Egyptology insists was entirely within reach of a civilization commanding tens of thousands of workers. Supporters of the traditional view point to this as proof of concept. Critics point to the visible gap in precision and consistency, and argue that gap has never been fully closed by any modern replication attempt, no matter how many times the experiment has been repeated. This is where the story stopped being just about ancient craftsmanship and started becoming an engineering investigation. An American mechanical engineer named Christopher Dunn, who has spent decades working with precision machinery, took a direct interest in these granite drill cores, the cylindrical plugs of stone left behind after a tube drill bores into a block. Dunn did not simply look at them and guess. He measured them. One core in particular became the center of the controversy, a granite core first documented by the pioneering Egyptologist Flinders Petrie back in the late 1800s. When Dunn examined the spiral groove wrapped around this core, he calculated what engineers call the feed rate, essentially how far the drill advanced into the stone with every single rotation. His number was staggering. According to his calculation, the drill was cutting roughly 1/10 of an inch deeper with every turn. When Dunn compared that figure to a modern industrial diamond-tipped drill cutting through granite today, he claimed the ancient tool was advancing into the stone at a rate roughly 500 times faster than its modern equivalent, all without the benefit of electricity, diamond tips, or steel. Dunn argued this could only be explained by some form of continuous, mechanically applied torque, a tool that received constant rotational force and constant downward pressure at every single moment, something almost impossible to sustain using a hand-cranked bow drill. He stopped short of claiming the Egyptians had electric machinery. Instead, he suggested that some kind of vibrational or mechanically assisted system, something we do not fully understand today, may have been used to keep the tool moving at a steady, controlled rate. Naturally, this claim did not go unchallenged. Other researchers who examined the very same core, including acoustics and stonework specialists, argued that Dunn had misread the marks entirely. In their view, the grooves were not one continuous spiral at all, but a series of separate rings, the kind of banding you can still find on cores pulled from ordinary quarries in the modern world. If that interpretation is correct, then the dramatic 500 times figure collapses, because there would be no single continuous spiral to measure a feed rate from in the first place. This single artifact, sitting quietly in the Petrie Museum in London, has become one of the most disputed objects in all of alternative history research, endlessly remeasured, rephotographed, and re-argued over by both sides. But the debate did not stay confined to one drill core. A research team affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania Museum took a different, more careful approach. Rather than relying only on visual inspection, they created detailed silicone molds of drill holes and granite cores found across Egyptian sites, capturing every microscopic ridge and line without damaging the original artifacts. Studied under magnification, these molds revealed the same unsettling pattern, tight, evenly spaced spiral ridges running through the stone with only slight variation. The evidence also pointed toward tube drilling, a method where a hollow cylindrical tool cuts a ring-shaped channel into the stone while leaving a solid core standing in the center, a technique still used in modern engineering and mining today. If ancient Egyptians really were tube drilling granite with this level of consistency using nothing more advanced than copper and sand, it would represent an extraordinary mastery of manual craftsmanship. And if they were not, then the alternative explanation opens a door that mainstream archaeology has been reluctant to walk through. So what do conventional archaeologists actually say about all of this? They are not dismissive of the evidence. They agree the marks are real, the precision is real, and the drill cores are real. Where they disagree is on the explanation. According to the mainstream position, ancient Egyptian craftsmen used copper tube drills and bow drills, rotated back and forth using a rope wrapped around a wooden shaft, paired with extremely hard abrasive powders like emery, corundum, and quartz sand mixed into a wet slurry. In this model, the copper tube itself never actually cuts the granite. It simply holds the abrasive grains in place while they slowly grind the stone away, groove by groove, hour after hour, for as long as it takes. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that ancient craftsmen may have embedded small chips of extremely hard crystal, like quartz or corundum, directly into the cutting edge of the copper tube, dramatically increasing its cutting power. This is known as the embedded crystal theory. And it is a clever idea. The problem is that no physical example of such a tool has ever actually been recovered from an Egyptian excavation site. Not one. And this is precisely the gap that Graham Hancock keeps pointing back to. If a tool this important had been used across generations of Egyptian stonework, he argues, surely fragments of it should have surfaced by now. Instead, we have the results, cut deep into stone, but no confirmed tool that fully explains how those results were achieved. If you want to see this mystery at its largest scale, you have to travel to the Aswan quarry itself, the very site where Hancock had his unsettling realization. Lying half buried in the bedrock is the unfinished obelisk, an object so massive it is almost impossible to comprehend standing next to it. Commissioned during the reign of a powerful Egyptian queen, it was meant to rise roughly 42 meters into the sky and weigh close to 1,200 tons, making it easily the largest single obelisk ever attempted in Egyptian history. Then, partway through carving, a deep crack split through the stone, and the entire project was abandoned exactly where it lay, frozen in time for us to study thousands of years later. Because the work was never finished, we can see the raw cutting process itself, not the polished final result. Around the obelisk, workers left behind narrow trenches, curved channels, and rows of round depressions carved into the surrounding rock. Mainstream archaeology attributes these marks to a brutally simple method. Thousands of hard stone balls, known as dolerite pounders, repeatedly slammed against the granite by hand until the surrounding rock crumbled away. Several of these actual stone balls have been discovered at the site, which strongly supports this explanation, at least in part. But when engineers like Christopher Dunn examined the trenches more closely, they noticed details that seemed harder to explain through pounding alone. In places, the stone appeared to be cut underneath itself, creating overhangs that would be extremely difficult to produce simply by smashing a ball downward. Some surfaces looked less like the product of blunt impact and more like the result of a steady directional grinding force. Other researchers analyzing the trenches described what they called a stop and restart pattern, as if a cutting tool had worked forward for a stretch, paused, pulled back slightly, and then resumed cutting in the exact same line. To some, that pattern suggests deliberate, controlled tool use. To skeptics, it simply reflects shift changes among ancient work crews taking turns with hammers and chisels. From Aswan, the trail of evidence leads underground, into one of the strangest structures in the world, the Serapeum of Saqqara. Beneath the desert lies a long network of tunnels and side chambers, and inside those chambers sit colossal boxes carved from solid black granite, each one weighing an estimated 70 tons. These were not assembled from smaller pieces. Each box was carved and hollowed out from a single enormous block of stone. The official explanation places their construction under a powerful Egyptian prince who oversaw the burial of sacred bulls worshipped as living gods. The interior corners were sharp, clean, and almost perfectly square, an extraordinarily difficult feat to achieve inside a cavity carved into some of the hardest stone on earth using only hand tools. When Dunn compared boxes believed to have been made in different periods, separated by generations of craftsmen, the quality of the work remained remarkably, almost suspiciously, consistent. Adding another layer to the mystery, the exact age of these granite boxes was never confirmed by testing the stone itself. Instead, archaeologists dated them based on pottery fragments discovered nearby. Hancock argues this leaves the door open, even if only slightly, to the possibility that the boxes are older than believed, and that later civilizations may have simply reused and repurposed an already ancient underground complex. Some independent researchers have gone as far as proposing that these boxes were never meant purely as coffins at all, floating theories involving sound resonance or unknown energetic properties tied to their strange underground placement. It is important to say clearly that none of these energy-based theories currently have solid scientific backing. They remain speculation layered on top of a genuinely unexplained level of craftsmanship. Standing physically inside the Serapeum, many visitors describe an unsettling feeling, dwarfed by boxes large enough to swallow a small car, carved from stone that would shatter most modern power tools within minutes of sustained contact. Egyptologists who support the traditional timeline note that the surrounding tunnel network itself shows clear evidence of deliberate, phased construction using tools and techniques well documented elsewhere in Egyptian history, including chisel marks, ramp systems, and sledge tracks, consistent with known Bronze Age quarrying methods. To them, the boxes are simply the most extreme example of a skill set the Egyptians had already mastered elsewhere on a smaller scale, scaled up to an almost unbelievable degree for a project of enormous religious importance. For years, this entire debate rested on measurements taken with hand tools, calipers, and educated guesswork. Then, more recently, a new wave of investigation brought the mystery back into the spotlight using modern three-dimensional laser scanning technology. Researchers scanned granite drill cores and surviving stonework from Giza and Saqqara, generating extremely precise digital models of every groove and ridge. The results reignited the entire controversy. Some of the spiral patterns appeared to follow a strikingly mathematical rhythm, each rotation advancing forward by almost the exact same tiny distance, over and over, with a consistency that some engineers described as unmistakably machine-like. This renewed analysis also revived the long-running argument over Petri's granite core and its disputed feed rate, pulling the famous 500 times claim right back into the center of public debate, where it remains fiercely contested to this day. Instead of a simple solid shape, it features three delicately curved blades sweeping outward from a central hub, giving it an unmistakably aerodynamic, almost mechanical appearance, closer to a turbine fan or an old steering wheel than a piece of ancient pottery. Most Egyptologists believe it was very likely a ceremonial vessel, possibly used to hold oil, food offerings, or ritual items placed in the tomb for the afterlife, similar to other wide, flat stone bowls found from that same early period. But even accepting that explanation, one uncomfortable question remains. Carving delicate, thin, curved blades out of such a fragile stone, without the piece cracking or shattering, required an extraordinary and still not fully understood level of skill and control, whatever the object was actually used for. Similar unresolved questions surface at the temple complex of Karnak, where researchers have documented drill holes with walls so remarkably thin and clean that many engineers who study them struggle to explain the process using only basic hand tools. In some of these holes, the surrounding stone wall is thinner than a human finger, yet it survived thousands of years underground without collapsing or cracking under its own weight, a detail that continues to surprise structural engineers who examine it today. Attempts to recreate these exact results using traditional replica tools have produced mixed outcomes, some encouraging, some falling noticeably short of the smoothness and precision seen in the original ancient work, keeping the underlying questions stubbornly unresolved. There's also the matter of the raw material itself. Granite is what geologists classify as an igneous rock, formed from slowly cooling magma deep underground, and it is made up of a tightly interlocked mixture of quartz, feldspar, and mica crystals, each with a different hardness and a different reaction to cutting pressure. This matters more than it might first appear, because quartz alone sits close to granite in hardness, meaning any tool trying to cut through it needs to overcome not just one uniform material, but several different minerals resisting in different ways at the same time. Engineers who support the advanced tool theory argue that cutting through this kind of mixed, unpredictable crystalline structure at a steady, consistent rate, without the tool skipping, catching, or gouging unevenly across the softer and harder mineral bands, is far harder to achieve by hand than most people realize. Mainstream geologists counter that ancient Egyptian quarry workers likely understood the grain and internal structure of granite far better than modern observers give them credit for, developing an intuitive generational feel for the stone that let them work with its natural weaknesses rather than fighting against them. This is the point where Graham Hancock's theory grows even bolder and even more controversial. He suggests that the ancient Egyptians may not have invented this stone-cutting knowledge on their own at all. Instead, he proposes they may have inherited fragments of a much older engineering tradition, one belonging to an advanced civilization that existed before the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, a civilization Hancock believes was largely wiped out by catastrophic natural disasters. According to this theory, the scattered survivors carried pieces of that lost knowledge with them as they resettled across the ancient world, eventually influencing early cultures in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. To support this idea, Hancock points beyond Egypt entirely, toward other ancient sites separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, places like Pumapunku in Bolivia and several ancient stone temples across India, where researchers have also documented spiral grooves, remarkably interlocking stonework and geometric precision that echoes what we see at Aswan and Saqqara. At Pumapunku, high in the Bolivian mountains, massive andesite blocks feature perfectly straight channels, matching drill holes spaced with almost identical intervals and interlocking edges so precise that some stones fit together with barely a hairline gap between them, all cut from stone nearly as hard as granite, using a civilization believed to have had access to only the simplest tools. Skeptics note that these South American and South Asian sites are separated from Egypt by enormous distances, entirely different cultures, and centuries or even millennia of time, making a shared origin difficult to prove using current archaeological methods. Hancock's response is that shared origin does not require direct contact between these cultures at all, only a common ancestral source whose knowledge scattered outward long before recorded history began. In his view, this is not simple coincidence. It may represent scattered remnants of one much older shared engineering tradition, one whose true scientific foundation was eventually lost, its surviving fragments slowly transformed into religious ritual and sacred tradition, practiced by later generations, who no longer fully understood the original science behind their own techniques. Mainstream archaeologists remain firmly unconvinced. They point out, correctly, that despite decades of dedicated excavation across the region, no direct physical evidence of this proposed lost civilization has ever actually been unearthed. No tools, no settlements, no unmistakable technological remains. Until that changes, they argue, the lost civilization theory belongs in the category of intriguing possibility, not confirmed history, no matter how compelling the surrounding stonework appears. So where does that leave us, standing between two deeply committed camps who look at the exact same evidence and reach completely different conclusions? The verified, undisputed facts are these. The granite artifacts absolutely exist. The measurements taken by engineers like Christopher Dunn are real, physically documented data points, not fabrications. The spiral grooves, the flatness tolerances, the drill cores, the serapeum boxes, the unfinished obelisk. All of it can be seen, touched, and independently studied by anyone who travels to Egypt today. What remains genuinely, passionately disputed is the interpretation behind those facts. Mainstream Egyptology maintains that patient, skilled human craftsmen, working with copper tools, abrasive sand, and an enormous amount of time and manpower, were fully capable of producing every single result we see. Graham Hancock and a growing circle of independent engineers argue that certain specific details, the feed rate calculations, the mechanical consistency of the spiral grooves, and the complete absence of any confirmed physical tool capable of producing them, deserve far more serious scientific investigation than they have received so far. Neither side currently possesses a smoking gun capable of definitively silencing the other. Every new scanning technology, every fresh measurement, and every renewed inspection of these ancient artifacts adds another layer to a conversation that refuses to close, and that alone tells us something important, that our understanding of the ancient world is still very much unfinished, no matter how confident any single side sounds in the moment. So now the question comes back to you. If future scientific investigation continues to suggest that some of these ancient stones cannot be fully explained using the known tools and techniques of their time, should historians be willing to rewrite the textbooks? Or should we hold firm to the current explanation until undeniable new evidence forces a change? Leave your answer in the comments below, and let us know which side of this debate you find more convincing, and whether you think a lost civilization theory deserves more serious scientific attention than it currently receives. If this video kept you hooked from the very first grooves in that granite quarry all the way to the final word, make sure to subscribe, because ancient history is still hiding secrets, and we are only just beginning to uncover them.